Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, January 20th. And we begin tonight with comments from Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Now, he says the country's premiers are united in their push for more health funding from Ottawa. Mr. Ford says he always consults with the 12 other provincial and territorial leaders, and that there will be no individual deals on healthcare funding with the federal government. Canada's premiers and health ministers have called on Ottawa to increase its share of healthcare costs to 35%. Now, this is up from the current 22%. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said the funding increase will only happen if the provinces agree to reform and improve their healthcare systems. All right, well, meanwhile, Federal Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says discussions with the provinces and territories about healthcare investments are continuing collaboratively. Mr. Duclos told an Ottawa news conference this morning that he is feeling personally optimistic and that he's looking forward to positive developments in the weeks ahead. He says the talks are focused on 5 fundamental areas of shared priorities. This includes reducing backlogs and supporting healthcare workers, as well as helping Canadians age with dignity. Another interest rate increase is likely to come from the Bank of Canada next week. Economists expect the central bank to hike its key interest rate for the 8th straight time next Wednesday in an effort to rein in inflation. Desjardins economist Royce Mendez says the bank will likely justify the rate hike by pointing at the red-hot labor market and sticky underlying inflationary pressures. Most commercial banks are forecasting a 0.25 percentage point rate hike, which would bring the central bank's key interest rate to 4.5%. All right, switching gears to a look at the country's ongoing pilot shortage. Canada needs to train even more pilots. Now, that is the message from a 2018 report by the Canadian Council for Aviation and Aerospace. Now, in 2023, the number of new commercial pilot licenses being issued is minuscule. On average, between 2012 and 2019, Transport Canada said there were 1,116 licenses issued annually. Last year, after a steady decline, only 238 licenses were issued. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Anita Anand says it's critical that Ottawa upgrade defenses in the north. The federal government says it will spend another $80 million to help upgrade a Nuvix airport in the Northwest Territories. Minister Anand says this will make the airport more suitable for larger and heavier aircraft, which would enhance the Canadian Armed Forces' ability to operate in the Arctic. She says the Arctic faces unique safety and security concerns because of climate change. Construction is expected to be complete in 2027. Moving to Alberta now, where Premier Danielle Smith says a committee will investigate how the Alberta government responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. She says former Reform Party leader Preston Manning will lead it and pick its other members subject to her approval. Ms. Smith says Mr. Manning and the panel are to take feedback virtually from experts and the public. This is before handing in a report with recommendations by November 15th. The budget is $2 million, and Mr. Manning is being paid $253,000. Both Mr. Manning and Ms. Smith have been critical of government-imposed health restrictions. On the West Coast, British Columbia has surpassed a grim COVID-19 pandemic milestone. Data from the province's Centre for Disease Control shows there have been more than 5,000 deaths linked to COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. The centre says trends in severe outcomes, such as new hospital admissions, new critical care admissions, and deaths due to the virus, are either relatively stable or declining. The latest numbers from BC show 27 deaths linked to COVID-19 in the last 30 days. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has issued a cheese recall for a product that may have been distributed nationally. The fromage au village and la vache au maillot, soft and semi-soft surface-ripened cheese, have been recalled due to possible listeria contamination. The cheeses were sold in Ontario, Quebec, and online. Food contaminated with listeria may not look or smell spoiled, but it can still make you sick. Symptoms include vomiting, nausea, fever, muscle aches, severe headache, and neck stiffness. The Confederation Center of the Arts in Charlottetown has set up a website to allow people to have a closer look at the handwritten manuscript of Anne of Green Gables. There will be a digitized version of Lucy Maud Montgomery's classic children's novel written in 1908. It includes notes on the backs of pages and revisions of famous moments in the story. The original manuscript is 1,100 pages long. More than 2 years in the making, the site includes photos, videos, and audio annotations, and there are 24 articles written by authors from 15 different countries. Stay with us. We'll be right back. A new report from Statistics Canada says retail sales fell 0.1% to $61.8 billion in November. Retail sales were down in 6 of 11 subsectors, representing 47.4% of retail trade. StatsCan says overall core retail sales, excluding gas stations and motor vehicle and parts dealers, saw the biggest decline in 11 months, down 1.1%. The agency says its preliminary estimate for December suggests retail sales edged back up 0.5% for that month, while cautioning the figure would be revised. A lawyer says that 19 Canadians who were detained in Syrian camps run by Kurdish forces, including 13 children, will be repatriated to Canada. Lawrence Greenspan says an agreement has been reached with Global Affairs Canada. Family members of the women and children had been arguing in federal court that the government must arrange for their return. They claimed refusing to do so violated the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Mr. Greenspan says the timing for returning the 19 Canadians is confidential. On the East Coast, the president of Labrador's Inuit government is urging policymakers to visit his region so they can better understand the issues facing residents of Nunavut. Johannes Lampe made the appeal today as Ottawa announced $1.17 million in funding. This will be to help address the overrepresentation of Inuit in the justice system. Mr. Lampe says Labrador's Inuit are targeted by the RCMP and forced to navigate a system that doesn't understand their history or culture. All right, well, on the other side of the country, residents of a BC condominium complex in Campbell River remain out of their homes after Tuesday's landslides. The Vancouver Island City has declared a state of local emergency in the aftermath of the incident, which forced at least 30 people from their homes. Campbell River has also put an evacuation alert in place for nearby properties. They say a review of the landslides highlighted matters in need of further investigation that may pose risks to the surrounding area. All right, well, back in the East Coast, the union that represents ER nurses in Nova Scotia says the government's plan to bring in more outside staff to help at emergency departments isn't addressing their concerns. The Nova Scotia Nurses Union said yesterday that the most urgent problem to fix is the large vacancy rate for emergency department nurses. President Janet Hazelton says the province should also provide greater incentives to keep nurses on staff. Now, this includes improving pay and ensuring they can take vacation breaks. Ms. Hazelton says the Nurses Union also wants the province to ensure that a licensed practical nurse is present in each waiting room to observe and address waiting patients. All right, moving to the prairies now, where the sale of a Winnipeg nonprofit housing complex is causing a backlash from the residents who currently live there. The crowd of concerned residents outside Lyons Place, some in wheelchairs, held a demonstration yesterday. They are calling for the province to step in and freeze rent increases at the 287-unit building. For its part, the government's Families Minister says it is committed to ensuring the residents won't face rent increases or be displaced based on the ownership of the building. All right, turning to a new scam that targets both homeowners and buyers. It's called total title fraud. Thieves impersonate true property owners by using fake identification and then sell off homes that they do not own. Fraud investigator Brian King says his firm has recently investigated several cases of total title fraud in the Greater Toronto area. Tim Hudak, CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, says those most vulnerable appear to be owners who have been absent from their homes for a long time. Switching gears to a new Canadian study that says kids who have suffered a concussion should get back to school sooner to give them a better recovery. The study was published in the JAMA Network Open on Friday. It found that kids between 8 and 18 who returned to school in fewer than 3 days after injury showed more improvement in symptoms 14 days later than the kids who stayed home from school longer. The study says it's important for schools to make accommodations for students with concussions. Now, this includes excusing them from any contact-based gym activities where they could hit their head again, and allowing students experiencing cognitive symptoms to postpone tests until they have improved. Ontario's former Lieutenant Governor will be honored with a state funeral at the end of the month. David Onley, whose death was announced on Saturday, will lie in state for 2 days at the provincial legislature before the January 30th funeral. Current Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Dowdeswell noted Mr. Onley used his status as the first person with a physical disability to raise awareness and help break down barriers facing other disabled residents. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to take a look at the major developments in the world of cryptocurrencies with Catherine Murray. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Up now, Forum Daily's Crypto Update.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing Bitcoin rally strongly, well off the lows of about 16,000 and trading above 21,000, alongside the very strong rally we've seen in equity markets to start 2023. And in fact, Bitcoin is the best performing asset class over the past week, up by about 23%. Now, of course, this is all on the back of investors believing that the U.S. Federal Reserve will pull back or hold off on their aggressive Fed tightening policy. But again, the jury's still out on that front. Meanwhile, as we have taken a look at the crypto winter, or as I sometimes say, are we in a crypto ice age? You've actually seen the number of developers within the space of blockchain, crypto, as well as Web3 increase year over year, up by about 8% or so, to apparently 61,000 developers. What's interesting about this as well, though, is that their focus is on alternative ecosystems. So not just Bitcoin or Ethereum, but other areas such as Solana or Polkadot blockchain, Polygon, or Cosmos. So there's still a real interest in developing the areas and different ecosystems. So there's still a real interest in the space. And of course, the space has been decimated to such a degree and so many bankruptcies because of the FTX fallout, taking a number of players with it. An update here on FTX, we have to keep our eyes on that. The company has been cleared to sell Ledger X as well as other assets. Apparently, they have found value of about 5.5 billion US dollars. So that's one new development. The other interesting aspect is that the CEO who's taken over to help with the liquidation has actually said that they're exploring the possibility of relaunching FTX International Exchange. And the decision will really come down to whether or not there will be more value for creditors if they relaunch that exchange versus liquidating the assets. So more to come on that front. Away from that, of course, with the fallout of FTX, you've got a lot of asset managers and traditional finance players that moved into the crypto space from their traditional Wall Street money management jobs. And so there's a number of hedge funds that have been created over the past number of years. According to Barclay Hedge, the performance in 2022 on average of about 47 crypto hedge funds was a negative 50%. That isn't actually as poor as a result as what we saw in 2018, where the performance was down 60%. So again, just keeping our eyes in terms of what's been going on in the asset management performance side of cryptocurrencies. Also, we've got to do a bit of an update here on Genesis Global. The prime brokerage and lending aspect of this company have in fact filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, but their trading and custody continues to operate. Now, Genesis, which of course was founded by the famous Facebook twins, the Winklevosses, they're suing Genesis's parent company, DCG, claiming $765 million of unsecured claims against Genesis. Recall, Gemini partnered with Genesis as their lender for one of their products. So that's something ongoing that we're continuing to keep our eyes on as well. Two big players within the space. Also, just in terms of further updates and take on uptake, I should say, around the world, you've seen Brazil's second largest private bank launch its first tokenized credit note. under the watch, of course, of their central bank, Brazil's central bank. And the value of this is 10 million Brazilian reals, which is equivalent to 1.95 million US dollars. But nonetheless, we continue to see development within the space. Importantly as well, we're keeping our eyes on the use cases as well. And according to the crypto analytics firm Chain Analysis, they've actually reported that illicit transaction volume is up within the Bitcoin cryptocurrency space year over year and for the second year in a row, but it only accounts for 0.24% of total transaction volume. We also learned from the ECB in a blog that they put out back in November, the European Central Bank that is, postulating that Bitcoin is actually rarely used for nefarious activities. So important to point this out from a use case that it challenges the perception about crypto being used by nefarious actors and players. Lastly, here are 2 points from CEOs. JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, CEO, said that Bitcoin is a hyped up fraud. He said it on CNBC this week. At the same time, and countering that, according to BNY Mellon's CEO, ignoring digital assets would be like sticking with paper over moving to a computer.
Defense Minister Anita Anand joined Western allies today in Germany amid debate over whether tanks should be sent to Ukraine. The Western defense ministers heard from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who pleaded for more aid via video link. After the UK announced last week that it would send tanks to Ukraine, Germany and the US have faced pressure to follow suit. The Ukrainian leader told the ministers gathered that terror does not allow for discussion. Moving to conflict in Somalia now, where at least 100 people were killed today during an intense battle in the Galgaduud region. Both Somalia's government and al-Qaeda-linked fighters confirmed the death toll. It is the deadliest battle since a major military offensive was launched against extremists last August. The government claims the fighting broke out after al-Shabaab extremists attacked a Somali National Army base, which was recently taken back from the fighters' control. Now, meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed a substantial boost in military spending through the end of this decade to face evolving threats. Mr. Macron announced a proposal for 413 billion euros in military spending for the period of 2024 to 2030. Now, that compares with spending of about 295 billion euros in a similar military plan for 2019 to 2025. Western envoys are visiting Kosovo as part of their ongoing efforts to diffuse tensions with Serbia and possibly reach a reconciliation agreement. Envoys from the EU and the US on Friday were joined by those of France, Germany, and Italy to meet with Kosovo's prime minister. Later, they moved to Belgrade and met with the Serbian president. The meetings are meant to discuss the next steps in the normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo, which proclaimed independence in 2008. Japan has formally resubmitted documents seeking to obtain UNESCO World Heritage recognition for a controversial former gold mine. Japan's earlier hope to get the Sado Island mine listed as a World Heritage Site this year was delayed. This is because the original documents filed were insufficient and required more information. The mine in northern Japan operated for nearly 400 years, and it was once the world's largest gold producer before closing in 1989. South Korea has opposed the registration due to Japan's abuse of Korean laborers during the 1910 to 1945 colonization of the Korean peninsula. All right, turning to India now, where the foreign minister says his country has given financial assurances to the International Monetary Fund to facilitate a bailout plan for Sri Lanka. The move is the first formal announcement from one of the island nation's creditors. India's foreign minister announced the support on Friday while on a two-day visit to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka and the IMF have reached a preliminary agreement on a $2.9 billion bailout plan for over 4 years. However, final approval depends on assurances given by creditors on the debt restructuring. Tech giant Google is laying off 12,000 workers. It is the latest tech company to trim staff after rapid expansions during the COVID-19 pandemic have worn off. Earlier this week, Microsoft announced 10,000 job cuts, or nearly 5% of its workforce. Amazon is cutting 18,000, and Facebook parent Meta is cutting 11,000 positions. All right, taking a look at the housing market south of the border now. The U.S. National Association of Realtors says sales of previously occupied homes were down nearly 18% last year over 2021. It says that marks the weakest year for home sales in the U.S. since 2014. The drop in sales came as mortgage rates more than doubled. The U.S. Federal Reserve aggressively hiked its key lending rate in a bid to cool the American economy and tame inflation. But the median national home price for 2022 still jumped 10.2%. A Romanian official says a judge in Romania has granted the request of prosecutors to extend the arrest of Andrew Tate by 30 days. Andrew Tate is a former professional kickboxer and social media personality. He was previously banned from various platforms for expressing misogynistic views and hate speech. The 36-year-old British U.S. citizen was initially detained on December 29th in Romania's capital. This was on the charges of being part of an organized crime group, human trafficking, and rape. His brother and 2 Romanian women were arrested and held in the same case. The first Indigenous American woman in space has embarked on her first spacewalk. NASA astronaut Nicole Mann emerged from the International Space Station today alongside a Japanese astronaut. The pair was to install support struts and brackets for new solar panels launching this summer. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.